Welcome to the final video in this first part of the new Masterclass for Web and Product Managers. This is Shane Diffley. In the preceding lessons we learned that the success of a management system is determined by how well you're able to configure the basic activities and resources of web governance that underlie operations. That is, can you organize everything such that the burden of activity placed on you can be balanced by the resourcing you have available, and thus create the stability you need to focus attention where it's really required on your online goals. As we saw, the new framework of web governance can help make some useful predictions about the type of system that may work for you. By way of reminder, the framework is composed of just 3 elements. The element of activity describes all the things you must do in order to manage a site effectively. It encompasses 4 high-level categories, each of which contains a series of subtasks, of which there are 22 in total. Remember, each of these tasks must be done in order to create a stable web environment. They are non-negotiable. Resource describes all the things you must invest in order to make sure the above activities can happen. Again, there are 4 high-level categories, each of which contains distinct sub-elements. And finally, at the heart of the model, we have the concept of scale, which is a measure of the complexity, size, and levels of engagement of an online service, and helps determine how to configure the activities and resources into a workable system of management. Perhaps the most important thing to remember about this framework is that it is applicable to digital products of all types, no matter how big or small they are or what they're about. That is, it makes no difference if you oversee the mobile presence of a giant transnational corporation or are a simple one-man band looking after a basic brochureware site. The same 4 categories of activity, including each of the 22 subtasks, must be done, and supported by the same resources. The only thing that changes is that the granularity and sophistication by which they are expedited increases as scale increases. For example, although one person can usually look after everything on a small-scale site, as your presence becomes bigger, busier, and more complex, each of the 22 subtasks begins to occur with enough frequency and in enough detail for them to emerge as distinct entities in their own right, up to the point that eventually each demands its own resourcing, including staff with specialist skills, expensive tools, formal processes, and a big budget. As this happens, what often occurs is that the original web guy begins to step back from operations and take on more of a coordination role, as seen in many web and product management positions. This person is still responsible for all work being done, it's just that they no longer actually do much of the design, content, code, or other tasks themselves. But this too has its difficulties. For, as an online service grows, with more being done by more people more frequently, it becomes harder and harder to retain visibility over absolutely everything. The danger is that gaps could then creep in without your knowing. Furthermore, because many of the tasks of online are now so specialized, it's difficult to always judge whether they're being done right or to the right level of quality. Such issues are particularly pronounced for web managers, who, unlike many product managers, often have several direct reports, as well as overall accountability for steering a team, and may indeed be further exacerbated if this person has little background in online, but has merely been appointed to the role, something that occurs quite often, especially in government. So if you recognize yourself in this description, you should find this module particularly useful. In this video, we'll explore what a good configuration of web or product management actually looks like by examining in detail the endpoint we're aiming for, stability. The purpose is to show how to investigate whether the administrative systems you have in place are capable of delivering, or if not, what could go wrong. You'll also learn how to isolate issues that threaten performance, and then how to build a business case that can persuade senior executives to act. To get the most from this module, I recommend you first complete videos 1, 2, and 3 in order to be familiar with basic concepts. But if you're all set, we can now begin. As you may have noticed, much of the masterclass so far has emphasized how operational stability is principally a function of how well you can balance the burden of management activity versus the resources and leadership needed to make it happen. In that regard, it's my belief that it's mainly a poor understanding of the effects of changes in scale that leads many enterprises into trouble. I frequently point out that failure is designed into an administrative system when the ambition to grow online, that is to do more by adding more content and services of greater complexity to generate more engagement, is not matched by the investment or the authority to make it happen. The result is that teams go out of kilter, quality suffers, targets are missed, and things fall apart. While the model we have is a good starting point for solving this mess, it really is only that, a starting point, with little of the supposed sophistication needed to construct a setup that'll actually work. To do that, we need to learn much more about our intended endpoint of stability, so that first, when you have it, you can recognize it. Second, if you don't, you can identify the signals that reveal when things are off course. And third, by putting these two together, plan the fixes needed to rebalance operations. In a previous video, we defined stability as the primary distinguishing feature of good governance. As we discovered, stability is that state in which you can focus all your energies on online goals without being distracted by supervisory issues. A useful way to think of this is like the well-tuned engine of a car. When everything works well, it just hums away under the hood. Likewise, a balanced system of management is equally well-tuned, with the right resources being used in the right way to expedite the right activities. And just like a car engine displays qualities of a well-performing system, such as efficient miles per gallon or low emissions, so too has operations a series of traits that indicate smooth running within its component parts. Arranged within the framework of web governance, these essential traits are as follows. For each of the high-level activities, stability means that all tasks can be done in a timely manner and with no gaps, to the right level of granularity and quality, and with certainty about expected outcomes. For example, that web publishing will produce content that is accurate, readable, error-free, and up-to-date. Within the resource of people, stability requires that you, as a supervisor, have access to the right manpower with the right skills, placed in the right roles in appropriate teams, where everyone knows exactly what they should and should not be doing, and can act with the authority to make things happen. For processes, stability depends on using rigorous, reproducible, and predictable systems that can deliver consistent quality on a timely basis, with acceptable cost, based on clearly documented policies, standards, and guidelines. For tools, stability requires that your team has the support of all the appropriate technology, software, and other things needed to get the job done. And finally, as regards budget, stability also demands that these elements be supported with enough cash to ensure your strategic ambition can be accomplished. So, in a nutshell, that's what good web or product management in action should look like. Now, admittedly, there is a lot to this, and as we'll see in a moment, monitoring stability does require a degree of effort. And yet, when you actually achieve it, what's interesting is that all such complexity tends to fade away, to be replaced by just one key feature, where things just work. That is, you no longer have to cheat the system to get things to happen. You can take it for granted that, when you turn the key, the engine of operations will hum into life, meaning you don't have to spend time with your head under the hood, but can concentrate instead on your online goals. I know, it sounds great. So, what if this is not your experience? What if, after switching the ignition, your engine starts, but then shudders and shakes for a while and eventually stalls? How can you find out what's gone wrong, and where? And indeed, how can you put a fix in place? Well, the good news is that such investigations are often quite easy. Many aspects of operations are so sensitive that problems can quickly be recognized and traced back to governance. On a website, for example, obvious things like misspellings and broken links are usually symptomatic of sloppy processes, or tasks like quality assurance being overlooked. But the truth is that with so many things going on, increasing numbers of web and product managers are finding it harder and harder to spot issues. Indeed, few, especially on very large-scale projects, can really claim to know just how well their systems are performing, or what problems they face. They haven't the slightest clue whether complications in, say, design are due to honest but mistaken decisions about user needs, or a shortfall in management. No doubt they would love to find out, but it's as much as they can do merely to correct such errors as they arise, whack-a-mole style, never mind investigate them all. There are simply not enough hours in the day. Or rather, there used to be. For perhaps the greatest boon in the discipline of governance over recent years has been the proliferation of new tools to support online coordination. More than anything else, they're helping managers reconnect online with operations and disperse the fog of uncertainty on many projects. As you may know, the basic contribution of technology is to automate mundane manual work, thus allowing staff to be put to more useful activity. But it also has another, more powerful application. For, as well as saving on labor, many tools also collect reams of data that can be cross-referenced to reveal detailed operational insights. In the same way as we're used to, say, analytics being used to measure performance for design and content, this new set of tools can do the same for management itself, making it possible to track stability with greater precision than ever before. We'll explore more about these tools in videos 2 and 3 in the next part of the masterclass, but among the most popular as regards traditional websites include the software of quality assurance for isolating errors in content, editorial and SEO checkers for improving readability and search engine ranking, technical monitoring for checking site availability and responsiveness, and lots more. Of course, with so many tools generating so much information, unless you know what you're looking for, warning signals could end up lost amongst the noise. As such, you need to be able to isolate those metrics that are most strongly connected with stability, and then trace them back to their source within governance. For instance, we've already seen how front-end symptoms like broken links and misspellings, captured perhaps using a QA tracker, may be linked to how back-end processes are managed. But it's a mistake to think that the only things that can go wrong are those that are easiest to verify. Instability will not always be revealed by issues in the user experience. It's entirely possible for a carefully configured governance system to deliver excellent online quality, at the same time as creating huge difficulties elsewhere, perhaps in fractured internal relations, high costs of delivery, risky practices, and more. These too are symptoms of dysfunction and need to be measured. To generate a more complete view then, stability is best tracked across three broad categories of indicators that are most at risk of and most impacted by flawed management. These are online, operational, and organizational. In summary, the category of online represents your ability to meet the minimum needs of users by evaluating such outputs as performance, functionality, accessibility, content, and more, where issues could be representative of problems in coordination. The same is true for operational indicators. These represent your ability to meet the needs of internal customers and stakeholders, where setbacks in things like turnaround times, communications, or costs can be indicative of instability. And finally, organizational indicators stand for your capacity to meet the requirements of the enterprise overall, where high staff turnover, heightened business risk, or growing costs could be suggestive of an imbalance between activity and resourcing. As may be seen, all three of these indicators include both quantitative and qualitative metrics. The reason is that, although quantitative metrics are more easily tracked, they do not represent the totality of experience and could on their own mislead you. For instance, good scores on a website for things like few broken links, a high standard of accessibility, and few misspellings could suggest that governance has been well configured in your case. However, subsequent comparison with feedback, ratings, and other qualitative sources may reveal another story, because although your online text might be error-free, it could be very poorly written and totally off-target, generating lots of negative commentary. So be mindful to draw on data from both sides of the measurement coin, and to triangulate from all three categories. This will make it both easier to hone in on problems and ensure you don't overlook something simply because one set of stats seems to be doing fine. I've seen this happen, where a high-quality mobile banking application was delivered to very happy users on behalf of a satisfied internal customer, but only off the back of a team that hemorrhaged staff due to enormous pressures of work and an unsympathetic employer. It was not a pretty sight, and in my estimation, a governance system that can't even hold on to its people is perhaps worst of all. So pay particular attention to how staff feel. They are the most reliable indicator of instability. If you begin to see evidence of falling morale, heightened interpersonal tension, and growing resignations, you'll know you've got a problem. In any event, when taken together, these indicators can act as a kind of management dashboard, like the dashboard of a car, to warn you when things are going wrong. Of course, every time something lights up in one of these areas, it doesn't mean your governance configuration is always to blame. A bad online experience could be due to an honest but mistaken decision about design or content, or negative feedback about your team could be down to a customer delivering fuzzy requirements. Or staff might be unhappy simply because of a bad canteen, something that's beyond your control. Nevertheless, the possibility remains that some aspect of governance is at fault, and to be certain, you need to do more than just speculate. You need to be able to audit things to clarify if and where culpability lies. A complete description of how to conduct a governance audit for a standard website is available at diffley.com and can be easily adapted for other types of product, including apps or mobile. In overview, having identified your wayward indicator, what you then do is track back from that starting point to examine any instabilities in the activities and resources that are connected to it. What you're looking for is anything that indicates either a lack of attention to the tasks of online or a lack of necessary support. In this regard, the key steps are, first, has the issue arisen as a result of a governance activity being ignored or not carried out to the right level of granularity? For example, if content goes live with many misspellings, is it because the task of, say, quality assurance is not occurring or only being done to a cursory level? Then, if not one, is it two because some process is not being followed or the process itself is not up to scratch? For instance, maybe QA is occurring, but the staff member is ignoring the documented procedure, or the procedure itself is not detailed enough and missing key steps. Then, if not 2, could it be 3 down to some issue of inadequate manpower, or the inappropriate allocation of such manpower? For example, perhaps the staff member responsible for QA knows that she needs to do it, but does not have the time. Or possibly no one has been formally assigned to QA by the web manager. If not 3, is it 4 because of some issue of staff skills, or poor application of skills? For instance, say the responsible staff member does not have the right expertise to carry out all the checks required, or perhaps the web manager has nominated someone who is inappropriate to the role by asking a developer to grammar check pages. If not 4, could it be 5 because of some issue of missing tools or misuse of tools? Maybe your staffer does not have the right technology for the job, or is using her tools in the wrong way. If not 5, is it 6 because of some issue of insufficient budget or misuse of budget? Maybe there's not enough funding for this activity, or so much funding goes into creating new content that there's little left over for ongoing maintenance. And finally 7, if none of the above, could it be down to some other dysfunction in governance, perhaps interpersonal tension among staff, poor communication, or an ill-defined strategy? Ideally, what these steps will do is expose gaps between how things are actually done versus how they should be done in order to generate stability based on the scale of your operation. And though disappointing and all as it can be to discover such issues, they do in fact represent the type of evidence you need for confronting executives about the requirement to increase investment. You see, the problem is that historically web and product managers have been very poor at negotiating for new spending and governance. In a sense, we've been our own worst enemies. We, digerati, are so flexible and so uncomplaining that rather than looking for justified increases in funding or changes in authority, we simply find ever more creative ways to make do with what we've got. The inevitable result is that senior management just keeps piling on the pressure, making a bad situation worse. Well, it's time to end this dysfunction. You and your staff have a legitimate expectation you'll be given the resourcing, leadership, and authority you need to get on with things, and it is literally senior management's job to do that. That's why they're paid, to make the hard, high-level decisions. If they choose to ignore that responsibility, well, they also choose to accept the dangers it involves, and to forgo the benefits that stability will bring to future competitive advantage. But of course, knowing that you deserve more investment, and then actually getting it, are 2 separate things. Merely complaining about your workload is unlikely to get you very far. It could be that your C-suite is perfectly fine with stressed staff, missing skills, cheap tools, and undocumented processes. Rather, to get noticed, you must do more than just explain how gappy your governance setup is. You need to expose the risks this creates for the business, in particular to its reputation, its ability to earn revenue, and the inefficiencies of cost, as well as to highlight the benefits that new spending could bring. In short, you need a business case. The key to building a compelling business case is to link your requirements with issues that are of interest to senior management, and then express them in a language they understand. For instance, many executives are quite risk-averse and hate learning about problems that could reflect badly on them or cause major disruption. A good place to start, therefore, is to actually draw attention to such things and connect them with operational instability. Sure, you can say, you can continue to pile work onto us, but beware. Things are now so stretched that without a matching increase in finance, we'll soon be unable to guarantee the stability of your web presence. If a key staff member goes on sick leave, or some major development requires unplanned attention, important actions will have to be postponed, creating serious threats, such as our reputation could suffer if embarrassing errors were to go live unintentionally, or revenue could fall if critical features were to fail as a result of an unexpected bug. In many instances, this negative outlook alone will be enough to get executives to act. But there's always the chance that such things will be swept aside, perhaps in a misguided effort to keep costs down. Consequently, you must also position investment as a means for generating new value, as well as averting threats. A direct comparison of online versus other channels can be useful in this regard. For example, I was once able to show a mid-scale non-profit that not only did its web operation deliver many direct savings, such as $25,000 a year in postage from PDF downloads, it also contributed donations in excess of $600,000 from an investment of just $300,000 a year, a 100% return. I then compared this to their average high street store, which had sales of $420,000 off an investment of $350,000, a 20% return. This helped expose many out-of-date assumptions and change thinking about where to allocate funds for best yield. Examples like this are usually irresistible to senior managers, who, as much as they hate hearing about problems, love collecting and sharing success stories. Combined together, these twin motivators of pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain can go a long way to bringing people on board. And yet, compelling and all as such stories are, we can't make your C-suite listen. They have to be ready. The sad fact is that, in my own experience, many executives only ever take operations seriously following some major incident, like a security hack, that results in a public humiliation. They then discover that this breakdown was not a bug or a freak occurrence, but a feature of a configuration of governance where staff are so overworked, so under-resourced, and so lacking in leadership that catastrophe was inevitable. Failure had been designed in. The embarrassment and fear this creates usually prompts some type of emergency funding, if only to avoid a repeat incident. Nevertheless, it could still take many months or even years for a complete understanding of the need for properly balanced operations to get through. In the meantime, all you can really do is keep plugging away, and if you seem to carry on knocking with no answer, just recall the long-standing advice about communications used by politicians. Once you know what you want to say it clearly, then say it again, and then say it again, and then again, and then again and again, and then again and again, and again and again, and then again and again and again, and again and again and again. And then, by the time you're absolutely sick of saying it, your audience, or senior management team, is probably hearing it for the first time. Which reminds us that, as so often, success is beyond the control of you or your team. You can only work with what you've been given, so go easy on yourself. And yet, in fairness to them, part of the challenge executives face is that, unlike more established disciplines like design or content, web governance is still so poorly understood, and with little to go on in terms of literature or advice to direct decision-making. In addition, the spend involved is of such significance, whether on hiring new staff, creating new systems, or purchasing new tools, that there's a real dread of getting things wrong. This creates the temptation to either ignore operations and hope they fix themselves, or to force the issue and demand that someone, usually you, create a perfect management system that is guaranteed to work under all circumstances. But as I've emphasized many times, there is in fact no perfect configuration for governance. And indeed, any attempt to craft one may simply lead you to adopt some orthodox setup that appears nice and tidy, but is in fact totally inappropriate to your circumstances. In this sense, you need to recognize that not only is your desired endpoint of stability quite elusive, but frequently quite counterintuitive too, making it doubly hard to pin down. What I mean is that, at one time or another, you've probably created a plan for something, it doesn't matter what, where you thought, well, in theory this should work quite well. The only snag being that when you tried it in practice, it was a complete flop. Yet the odd thing about web governance is that it's often the opposite that's true. Lots of organizations have systems of management that, although they sound bizarre in theory, for some reason work quite well. The most common example of this is the survival of the one-man, or at least astonishingly small, web team. Like me, you may be surprised from time to time to discover just how many huge sites are run by relatively tiny teams that by any of the rules of governance should be completely inadequate. I mean, we've already learned how as scale increases, more people must be hired and given more resources to support operations. And indeed, this is correct. But then again, there's nothing that demands all such investment be spent on, say, a central online team. After all, a team is just a group of people in pursuit of a common goal. Sure, a formally titled web team could remain at the center, but additional resources may be distributed among related departments, with perhaps budget for development staff going to IT, designers to marketing, writers to communications, and more. As long as everyone involved has the same set of expectations, where trust is high, relationships are good, and a minimum standard of delivery can be relied on, there may be no reason to change how things have always been done. In fact, this is precisely the setup experienced by many product managers, who coordinate effort among various groups from a central point. So take this as a warning not to be duped into anticipating a governance solution that fits a certain model of organizational structure or ownership. Neither a beautifully constructed team nor any particular composition of roles is your endpoint. Your endpoint is stability. If the configuration that delivers that for you is a one-man setup based on a strong and reliable network of relationships, so be it. Nevertheless, pressures of scale tend to make such arrangements, which usually depend on personal bonds, temporary at best. The trick is to recognize when things need to change, and then to build a more stable format, based on patterns and models that have been shown to work. The good news is that the last few years have revealed examples of organizations that, at least regarding website management, have truly nailed governance and settled into a long-term optimized state of operations. This includes institutions such as the UK government, universities like Harvard in the US, or MIT in Australia, as well as many major enterprises. What this means for us is that we can analyze them as exemplars to identify the features that make good management tick and direct our own decision-making. As before, we'll examine these through the rubric of a classic website, which typically involves some person who's in charge of and directs the work of a core team, though many of the same lessons can be applied to other types of product. A great starting point in such an instance is to consider just how active or passive this person in charge wants their management system to be, in essence whether they want their team to operate as a strong service leader or a less engaged but still pivotal service provider. A team that's a service provider is like a factotum. It generally has no mission in and of itself other than to serve the needs of internal customers. The purest instance of this may be seen in government, where teams sometimes exist merely to facilitate, for example, the housing office, the water office, the transport office, etc. This team may advise how things should be done in terms of design or content, but it does not decide what to do or when. In contrast, a service leader is much more active. Such a group is given its own agenda and budget and works alongside other departments. For instance, a web team in a financial services company may be told that, regardless of what they put online, they have the overriding goal of maximizing revenue. In this sense, web gets to select who it works with, whether pensions, credit cards, life assurance or other, and choose which products it features. Indeed, competing departments may have to pitch to them in the hope of being prioritized, much like a supermarket chooses what it displays on its shelves. What's interesting is how both these models have varied in popularity over time. Back in the early days of the 90s, the ability of one or two nerds in the IT department to lead online was essentially unquestioned. The information superhighway as it was so fringe and unimportant that they had it to themselves. Want to put a spinning logo on the homepage? Go ahead, why not? Sure, they could act as they wished, but the overall impact was low, as were the resources and budget provided to them. The late 90s then, and the early part of this century, was a period of flux, in which a growing interest caused lots more people to get involved. In this era, although some teams retained their position as service leaders, others saw their power diluted and began to act more like service providers. This corresponded with a fragmentation of roles, wherein skills that would soon become critical to online began to emerge in non-technical units, in particular content and communications. In such a fluid setup, the variety of stakeholders involved meant there was often no longer any obvious home for web. Being a shared service, no one really owned it, or perhaps even wanted to own it. In this case, control tended to gravitate towards whatever department most closely matched its work. If things were mainly comms-oriented, then marketing or public affairs may have taken it on. Alternatively, if web was mainly about supporting specialist applications, then IT may have retained control. Or perhaps it fell somewhere in between, and thus inaugurated the perpetual debate about which department in an enterprise really is best as a home for online. This fraught and fierce discussion has raged on for years, with no real resolution. Should web be owned by IT, marketing, communications, corporate affairs, operations, product, or even HR? Well, for my own part, I've never considered there to be a definitive solution. In fact, the sheer variety of answers I've heard, each supported with its own passionate justification, is, I think, demonstrative of a lack of cohesion. In many ways, it doesn't matter who owns it, so long as they can deliver the operational stability needed to support goals for an entire organization. That said, there has been a trend away from the early internet model of web living in IT, which made sense when it was mainly a technology concern, towards it either operating alone or from within marketing and communications, which also makes sense given its newer focus on engagement. In any event, all this deliberation may finally be coming to an end. A quarter century after Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web at CERN in Switzerland, a commonality of experience is at last suggesting a standard configuration of governance, including for ownership, that seems to work. The emerging consensus, based on the research of agencies such as Capgemini, Forrester, Gartner, and the Altimeter Group, as well as the experience of leading organizations, is that some form of service leader type model is best. For instance, in his report, Accelerating Digital Transformation, the respected analyst Didier Bonnet at Capgemini states, older silo-based operations centered on products or organizational units, instead of customers or business processes, are coming under increasing pressure to change. His inquiry suggests a number of approaches for getting governance to work, of which the most relevant is creating what he terms a shared digital unit. Such a unit is described as a centralized body for the development of digital capability, services, and skills to which every part of a business must refer, and which also has its own budget and agenda. Didier shares examples of such units in firms as varied as Pfizer, Starbucks, and Cisco. The trend seems to be that, much like people management is planned and operated centrally by a HR department, so too are web teams taking on the mantle of leadership for all aspects of online. And yet, a key challenge for those who want to follow such advice is to understand how things are done in real life, in particular when configuring authority, deciding on roles and responsibilities, and more. As you may realize, obtaining such insight is often quite hard, and is an ongoing problem with governance research. Unlike UX, content, and code, which are by nature visible to everyone, many firms don't reveal details of how their digital operations are managed, and trying to read between the lines is tricky. For instance, I've often had to resort to trawling lists of job titles on LinkedIn in an attempt to divine putative team structures, kind of like an old-time cop using pins and string to connect mobsters. Not easy. The only exceptions to this rule of omerta seem to be universities, which publish a lot about their online teams, and government, which does similar. And in this regard, none is more open or publishes more than that of the UK government, which, as we'll see, is welcome on so many levels, but perhaps most of all because it's now acknowledged as the leading exemplar of governance excellence. As you may know, since 2012, the UK government has worked to redevelop and centralise a massive range of public services, from hundreds of state bodies and ministerial departments, into a single web presence. This endeavour was initiated by Martha Lane Fox as part of a critique of digital presented to government in 2010. Martha's vision was essentially to say, look chaps, I've done a review and I think we're missing something. Not only are we confusing the public by having fragmented services, but we're also confusing ourselves in how we manage it all, with fuzzy decision-making, duplication, and varying standards. I've done the numbers, and I'm sure we can do everything we already do, plus some more, and better, and save over £1 billion a year. As a business case, it was hard to ignore. In fact, I recommend you read it in its entirety. It's short and very compelling, and like everything from the UK government, it's freely available on their website. What Martha was saying was simple. The vast majority of the UK population is online with broadband, whether at home, at work, or on mobile. They want to deal with government online. Government allows them to do so, but only in a haphazard way via hundreds of different sites of varying quality. Instead, she said, let's bring it together, reap the benefits and savings of consolidation, and deliver a better online experience. Because if we don't, and here's the rub, we're going to hit a ceiling very soon. Sure, she indicated, government could continue to spend on online, but because of the way things were being done and the inefficiency of maintaining so many presences, marginal returns were decreasing fast. It would soon cost more to create a new site or application than could ever be justified by the expected benefit. As an alternative, she offered just 4 recommendations to turn things around, 2 of which focused on reorienting service, while the remaining 2 sketched out a new approach to governance and management. As regards the service side, Martha said that it was time to forget about having a website for every ministry or department. Rather, they should create a single portal that was home to, well, everything. One single place for all UK government content, wrapped within a high-quality experience. She also said government should open up to business by releasing more APIs, or application program interfaces, as well as adopting a flexible approach to internal technology. And both of these were good ideas. Indeed, many organisations pursue such consolidation strategies. But it was what she said next that really shook things up as regards making it happen. She signalled that the value on offer could only be achieved by adopting a new attitude to governance, moving away from a situation where development and ownership was scattered among many stakeholders, towards a centralised body with a clear mandate to lead. It was at her insistence then that a key decision was made. This was to appoint a new CEO for digital in the Cabinet Office, with absolute authority over the user experience across all government online services, and the power to direct all government online spending. Note the use of the words absolute authority. Martha knew that the change she recommended would be doomed in the absence of the power to make it happen. This new team must be able to lead, and know it has the mandate to do so. Solo runs and departmental diversity had to become a thing of the past. No one, no minister, no department head, no consultant, no Johnny-come-lately, no one could decide how content, design, code, or anything else could happen. Absolute authority must rest with the new team, and everyone should know it. As a vision for governance, it was crystal clear, and to its credit the British Cabinet gave her what she wanted, by strongly supporting the new GDS, or Government Digital Services Team, as the owner for online. But of course, getting things done required more than just agreeing on a vision. It required an ability to execute, and access to resources for driving change. The advantage for Martha was that, although it took a long time to turn the ship of government around, once it had decided to act, the immutable force of official bureaucracy could show its positive side by providing the backup needed to enforce a new regime. This included the appointment of Mike Bracken as Executive Director for Digital, recently retitled Chief Digital Officer, to head the GDS team, with the remit to be the unequivocal owner of high-quality user experience. And the success of Mike's team speaks for itself. Since reorganizing online operations in 2011, GDS has generated administrative savings of £300 million a year, alongside productivity enhancements of £1.2 billion. These are not paltry sums. And indeed, what is perhaps most striking is just how readily Mike has been able to bring the rest of government with him. I mean, given the scale of the transformation planned, a revolution, not an evolution, as Martha herself described it, sizable resistance could have been expected, especially as the new strategy required scores of sites to be shut down, web authority to be changed, and decades-old services completely rethought. And yet the professionalism of the change management protocols followed, and the range of tools, training, and other services provided to staff succeeded in getting people on side. As a matter of fact, the sheer quality of supports, such as the new Service Design Manual, performance dashboards, or more, easily matches that of the content created for the public. To me, this is the clearest indicator possible of GDS's determination to get governance right, and has deservedly created for them that rare and ideal change scenario, one in which the business wants to follow because they prefer that you lead. Putting everything together then, we see a pattern emerging. The lessons of the UK government, as well as the research of Capgemini and others, show that stability in web or product management can be achieved, but that it requires three things. First, a clarity of governance vision, so that you and everyone else knows for certain how operations will work, including ownership, leadership, and authority. Second, an insistence on balancing operations, such that everyone has access to the resources needed to expedite their online burden. And third, a firm and unyielding commitment to make things happen, by building a system, just like in the UK government, that not only makes change inevitable, but preferable. Over and above everything else, it is these three key factors of success that demand primacy in any plan you create for governance renewal. Now, I won't kid you, reshaping such fundamentals is not easy, and it is not cheap. Not only does it require tenacity in the face of opposition, but constant negotiation to safeguard the funds you'll need to keep on track. But there is a payoff. As noted by Didier Bonnet at the Oracle Annual Conference in 2014, governance is now the biggest driver of profitability for digital innovators. So, as they say, failure is no longer an option. And with that, we come to the end of the first part of our masterclass. Over the course of the past 4 videos, I've tried to familiarize you with the basic grammar of governance that underlies web and product management, and also reveal the path you must follow if you want to reimpose order on operations. But I don't want you to stop here. In fact, we've only scratched the surface of how things are done in the real world. In the second part of the masterclass, we'll explore in much more detail each of the 3 key factors of success needed to deliver stability, to show how they can work for you. For instance, in video 1, you'll discover how to create a new vision for governance that includes concrete recommendations for resolving any outstanding issues you have in ownership, leadership, or authority. In video 2, you'll learn how to restore operational balance by deploying manpower, processes, tools, and budget in such a way that matches your burden of activity. This includes an examination of the critical role web and product managers have in coordinating strategy, as well as an analysis of the skills you'll need to keep on top of things in future. In video 3, you'll discover techniques for bringing people with you during the process of governance transformation, as well as helpful business-as-usual supports for keeping things on track. And finally, in video 4, I'll reveal a simple roadmap you can use to increase the chances that the management journey you're on will have a happy ending. So let's not stop just yet. Join me in the first lesson of part 2 of the masterclass, where we'll define a new vision for governance, so that everyone in web or product management, including you, can have confidence in the way ahead. Thanks for watching. Remember, for lots of additional insights as well as free downloads, visit my website at diffley.com.